an Inspector Harold Price mystery. In the quiet academic heart of Bloomsbury, beneath ivy-covered brick and towering library windows, knowledge is power. And power, when threatened, can be deadly. When a respected university professor is found dead in his office, authorities assume the culprit lies among radical students and political agitators. Heated debates, public protests, academic unrest, but Inspector Harold Price knows better. Because murders driven by ideology are loud, this one is silent. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, just a cup of tea cooling beside a desk stacked with research papers. As Price begins his investigation, he uncovers something far more dangerous than campus politics. A quiet, professional reckoning, hidden inside footnotes, falsified credentials, and a career built on fragile foundations. Someone had been exposed, and someone decided disgrace was worse than murder. What follows is a story of ambition, betrayal, and the deadly cost of reputation. Here is your exclusive preview. Excerpt from A Body in Bloomsbury. Inspector Harold Price disliked universities, not for their architecture. Bloomsbury possessed some of the finest red brick facades in London, but for their peculiar silence. It was not the peaceful quiet of a country lane or a church nave. It was a studied stillness, the kind that suggested unfinished arguments lingering in the air. He followed the porter down a narrow corridor lined with framed academic portraits. Professors gazed out from gilded frames, their expressions fixed in permanent intellectual authority. Outside one door, 2 constables waited. Professor Arthur Whitcomb, the porter said quietly, found just after 8. Price nodded and stepped inside. The office was immaculate. Tall shelves crowded with journals and leather-bound volumes stretched to the ceiling. A large oak desk sat at the centre, papers arranged in careful stacks. Near the window rested a porcelain teacup. Professor Whitcomb sat slumped forward in his chair, spectacles still perched on his nose. There was no blood, no overturned furniture, no sign of struggle. Price approached slowly. Whitcomb's face held a peculiar calm, as though he had merely drifted into sleep while reviewing manuscripts. Price bent closer. The faintest herbal scent lingered in the air. He straightened and turned to the medical officer. Initial assessment? Likely poisoning, Inspector. No external trauma. Price's eyes drifted to the teacup. How warm was it? Barely. Which meant Whitcomb had drunk it shortly before death. Price circled the room. Locked windows, intact door, wallet untouched. A tidy death, which almost always meant a personal one. Later that morning, Price questioned students who spoke eagerly of political radicals and shouting matches outside lectures. Names were offered, accusations made, but students protested everything. They rarely poisoned professors. It was during faculty interviews that a different pattern emerged. Dr. Malcolm Avery, senior lecturer, composed and courteous, explained he had met Whitcomb the previous afternoon to review a draft paper. He was examining inconsistencies in recent academic publications, Avery said. Citation errors, misrepresented credentials. Price watched Avery's eyes. No flicker. Yet something in the man's careful posture unsettled him. Back in Whitcomb's office, Price opened a thin folder tucked inside the desk drawer. Photocopied diplomas, teaching appointments, academic publications annotated in red ink. Whitcomb had not been debating theory. He had been dismantling careers. One name appeared repeatedly. Avery. Degree credentials traced to institutions that no longer existed. Research built on data that had been quietly withdrawn. Whitcomb had been preparing to expose everything. Price closed the folder. Careers were not merely livelihoods, they were identities, and Whitcomb had been preparing to strip one away. In the botany laboratory, Price discovered that a small quantity of digitalis-based tincture had been signed out late the previous afternoon. The signature was neat, familiar. Avery, digitalis, a slow-acting toxin when prepared correctly, easily masked in tea. When Price confronted Avery, the man remained calm. Too calm. But that composure began to fracture when Price reviewed Avery's latest lecture notes. Halfway through, something caught his attention. Avery had quoted a specific statistical conclusion from Whitcomb's research, a conclusion Whitcomb had already disproven and removed weeks earlier. The revision had never been circulated. Only Whitcomb, and the person who reviewed his private papers, could have known the original phrasing. Price leaned back slowly in his chair. There it was, not proof yet, but a crack. The following morning, Avery sat across from Price in a quiet interview room at Scotland Yard. "You quoted Professor Whitcomb's preliminary conclusions," Price said. "Yes." "They were withdrawn 3 weeks ago." Avery hesitated. "They were part of his draft," Avery said. "Which draft?" "The one he shared with me." Price leaned forward. "You were the only colleague reviewing that draft." Silence settled between them. "You also signed out digitalis tincture the afternoon he died." Avery swallowed. "He was going to destroy everything," Avery said softly. "My credentials, my publications, 30 years of work reduced to accusations." Price said nothing. "He called me in under the pretense of collaboration," Avery continued. "He laid out the evidence calmly, told me he would forward his findings to the dean." Avery closed his eyes. "I added the extract when he turned away." Price folded his hands. "You didn't kill him to preserve scholarship," he said quietly. Avery looked up. "You killed him because he proved you never earned it." Later, as Avery was led away, Price stood alone in the corridor. He thought of Whitcomb, seated calmly in his office, unaware that professional courtesy had become his execution. Outside, Bloomsbury returned to its routines. Students resumed lectures. The university contained the scandal quietly, and London absorbed another crime without ceremony. Price stepped into the winter air. This had not been a crime of passion. It had been a crime of reputation. Another classic mystery. Another truth uncovered, and another reminder that some of the deadliest secrets are hidden in plain sight.